Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. All right, boys. Thank you for joining me again. We have a new president coming in, and yet we still have this war in Ukraine. I think it's been 1,000 days since the war started. The question I've always had now that I'm reading new events is there a difference between the new president coming in, Trump that is, versus how Biden has approached the war in Ukraine? And I'll let you talk.
Yeah, thank you. So as I go, occasionally I talk too long with myself and I develop my own terminology and I start using lingo that only I understand. Please, if I do that, stop me and get me to explain. Okay. The media and the talking head class make it look like there is a fork in U.S. foreign policy towards Ukraine, and that there are two approaches towards Ukraine in the foreign policy establishment. One of them is internationalist and pro-democracy and against autocracy, represented by Biden administration mostly, and few people in the old line of the Republican Party. And those people want to support Ukraine to the fullest and want Ukraine to win the war over Russia and regain its occupied territory.
In complete territory, no compromise.
Yeah. The sometimes they mutter, under the, in underhanded tones that, well, actually they have to compromise in some fashion because this has to come at an end and stuff like that. But officially, Ukraine is a democracy. Ukraine is a Western democracy. Russia has no business interfering with it. It has to withdraw. Then there is the other supposedly isolationist approach that is represented by Trump and his allies in the Republican Party, who don't care about democracy or autocracy. They just care about not spending U.S. money on foreign wars, don't want to spend money on aiding Ukraine, and actually want to carry favor with Putin because occasionally it comes mutterings from the liberal side of the media. These people are pro-autocracy and they are bad. Well, the truth is that is complete nonsense. There is only one foreign policy in the US, irrespective of party, because foreign policy is described in terms of the underlying strategic interests of the US. There is an agreement about the strategic interests of the US in Europe, and that's the US should dominate Europe. This is not in this agreement between Republicans or Democrats. It's not in this agreement between the conventional old line Republicans and the new fangled and improved crazy Trump Republicans. The difference is more in the way they present it and in their tactics. So even Biden, when he supported Ukraine, was always clear that I will not allow the Ukrainians to use American weapons to attack Russia itself. So when Ukraine, for example, attacked Moscow or targeted Moscow, they used home-built or homegrown drones. He now has officially changed course by allowing them to use US missiles to attack Russia proper. Previously had also expanded his permission for them to use various types of weapons. But this, I believe, should be understood in the following perspective. Ukraine is much weaker than Russia, and it's fighting a much larger enemy. And what the US is trying to do is just to prevent Ukraine from failing or falling, rather than trying to drain Russia. Actually, although Biden says that he doesn't want to get into a war with Russia because he doesn't want NATO to go into war with Russia, I think there is a more important strategic imperative here. The US and most of Europe do not want to bring the Russian government to collapse, because what that would mean automatically is expansion of China, and their strategic enemy is China. Russia remains, in the end, a distant part of the Western colonial project. So they may always claim that, in the racist tones, claim that Russia actually has some savage, barbarian, Asian element, thus is less than completely European. That is actually old and goes back to Catherine the Great, 200 years ago. And the Russians don't like that and keep insisting that they're completely European and Western, and etc. But in the end, they still admit that's part of the Western colonial camp. China isn't. More importantly, China is rising. Russia is not rising. And Russia is the colonial power in the accepted, acknowledged colonial power by the Western colonial regime that controls the international order in Central Asia. If Russia collapses, China expands right away. So Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan maybe not. All of these are up for grabs.
Yeah.
That is not something that the US wants to happen. That is not something that most of Europe wants to happen. The English always have nefarious plans and actually seem to be pushing for war, but the English have always wanted and enjoyed putting Europe into bad position because the English believe that they are only strong when Europe is weak. But aside from the nefarious games of the English, the rest of the world does not think that, or the Western world does not think that bringing Russia down is a good thing.
Well, that's the case. Somebody wants to say that Russia, they see that Russia going down is not going to, it's going to make China stronger. So why would they help Ukraine, or why would they? What benefit do with that?
The US and Europe had to support Ukraine because Putin did not try to take another piece of land in Ukraine. Putin tried to invade Kiev. So what Putin was doing was challenging the international order. He was saying, well, I don't like the way this order is running. I'm going to take something by my force. I want to enforce myself as an independent power within this international order. And the international order led by the US said, no, you don't get to do this. And actually, they managed to contain him. Yeah. So that strengthened the order, in fact. His failure to take over Ukraine was important to strengthen the hold of the international colonial, Western colonial order on the world. But that order also sees that it has a bigger threat from China, so that's why it wants to contain but not bring Russia down. There is a distinction here, fine line. Okay, so that's why they support Ukraine, but not all the way. Okay, the fact that Biden is ramping up the support actually is quite tactical, because Biden has known all along that there is a good possibility for him to lose elections. So this didn't dawn on him in the last 2 weeks. And if he thought that U.S. strategic interests are going to be harmed by Trump, then he would have acted differently a year ago. Like you find there are states now in the U.S. in domestic policy that are changing their constitutions and laws in preparation for Trump taking the federal government because they see that they have vital interests that are going to be harmed by Trump. And this is ongoing and has been going for some time.
Yes.
Because, politicians can calculate and look forward a year. But Biden didn't do that because actually there is no difference. So when Trump talks about Putin being his friend and him being the great deal maker, this is his image that he likes to maintain. But in the end, what he's going to do is come to a deal with Putin. And Biden has always wanted a deal with Putin. So Biden has always been saying, well, actually, this has to come to an agreement. And his lower level officials have been giving signs that, well, this has to come to an agreement. And we are going to support Ukraine, but only up to a limit. They supported with a lot of money. Actually, the money and weapons they gave to Ukraine is much more than they gave to Israel. But then because Israel is attacking civilian population and Ukraine is fighting Russia, which is a state 5 times its size. Anyway, but the point is, it's always up to a limit because they want the Ukrainians in the end to come to the negotiating table. They don't want to say it openly because that would undermine the image of the international order, could undermine the US standing in Europe. So the
this is not about USA establishing democracy in Ukraine or them supporting Ukraine more than it is to establish world order in the region, and Ukraine is just a means in the process
Well,
to contain Russia.
well, any international order needs to maintain a story, cover story. The cover story of the Western colonial order has always been we are the beneficent West who is there to civilize the world. In the old days, civilizing the world was teaching them the Western ways, teaching them English, teaching them Christianity. Nowadays, teaching them democracy. Well, it's the same. It's still the same mentality. We are the father of the world. The rest of the world are just kids, and we're going to teach them and make use of them and exploit them under the table. So the Biden administration has always been saying in undertones that this has to be negotiated because Ukraine could not win the war. Okay, what Trump is doing is saying the quiet part loudly. Okay, there is a difference in style between the Trump wing of the Republican Party and even more broadly the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. The Biden and Democratic Party, this is the mainstream Democrats, are not very concerned with showing up to be grand and strong. They are not very concerned about broadcasting images of greatness, but they are very interested in exercising it. Mm-hmm. They are interested in exercising the imperial power of the U.S. In the old Ted Roosevelt mold of talk softly and carry a big stick. Trump and his allies in the Republican Party are in a more mafia-like talk trash and carry a big stick and use it randomly to keep everybody in check. So they are very concerned about projecting the image of strength. And they think that this is good policy because it keeps everybody in check. They think it's also good policy because it keeps everybody guessing about U.S. intentions. And as a result, they will give the U.S. as best a deal as ever it can get. Democrats calculate that, well, actually, this is a bad thing because we are the organizing power of the order. And the order needs to trust that it can expect us to honor our deals if we can make deals, if we're going to make deals with others, and if we're going to organize this order. And if others are not going to fear us and what we're going to do next, to the point where they start conspiring and allying against us. So these are different ways of conducting business, but the business is the same. The U.S. is the imperial power. Everybody has to follow its commands, and it eats first. And the rest of the Western powers eat next. And everybody else doesn't get to eat. Yeah, this is the jungle law. The lion eats first, the hyenas eat second, and nobody else gets to eat. Mm-hmm. So Trump is very concerned about looking imperial and big and important, so he doesn't want to look like he is being beaten in Ukraine.
I'll ask you a question. Don't you think China is aware of this and they're just sitting on the sideline and they're not taking advantage of the?
They are aware of this. They are actually supporting Russia, not necessarily because they like Russia, but because they understand that this is giving them at least 5 years of breathing space. So they love that. The first time the U.S. came to China, it was 2000, and Bush was president. But then they decided they were sidetracked with the launching the new colonial campaign on the Muslim world, and that gave China about 10 or a dozen years, 12 years of breathing space. And then the U.S. came back to the script of China is the danger to the world and the civilized world. Then Trump came and started going into this project, but he was going into squabbles with the Europeans. And then Putin decided that this was the good time to challenge the order and failed. So actually, China is quite lucky. This has been coming its way for the last quarter of a century and it hasn't yet.
So you're saying that China doesn't have even if Russia goes on, China is not thinking far ahead to dominate the world and be the imperial power of the world.
No. What I'm saying is this. First, China is a different kind of imperial power. So the Western order is interested in dominating the whole world and stealing the whole world. China is interested in dominating Eastern Asia, its neighborhood, and stealing the whole world. Okay, so it has a different vision of where it stands in the world. The Western order does not accept that any part of the world should escape its ability to steal. So that's why it finds China a challenge. However, China calculates that it doesn't have the economic might or the military might to challenge this order yet, and thinks that delaying the point at which they get head-to-head is to its advantage. So the farther it can delay it, the better it is.
Mm-hmm.
And in the last 10 years, since Xi Jinping has been in charge, they have actually been explicit about that. So this might have been implicit before, but they have been explicit that this is going to a head-on, but we'd better delay it as long as possible, because that actually gives us time and space to prepare.
So in retrospect, that being said, then China actually benefits, and the U.S., if the U.S. is aware of that, so U.S., for them, it might be better to end this as soon as possible and to put Russia in order, because it's giving China more breathing room or more breathing space.
Well, they actually, some of them have been saying that. Some of the strategists have been saying explicitly that this is a distraction. It's a dangerous distraction.
Okay. So what would you say? I mean, at this
But
point,
the media, of course, doesn't say that, because the media job is to sell the colonial project.
so, and that's understood. But for U.S., what would it take for them to feel that they put Russia in order, and that they finally accomplished their mission?
They have accomplished their mission. They have accomplished it a year ago. When Russia withdrew or had to withdraw, was defeated in the battle for Kiev and the battle for Kharkiv, they achieved their goal. Because Russia couldn't eliminate Ukraine, Russia couldn't enforce its political will on Ukraine at that point. All what it could do is achieve some territorial gains, which Russia needs to achieve, because if it doesn't achieve, then it would look defeated internally, and that can actually cause serious political threat, serious political threat. So the war has been going on just because the Ukrainians don't want to stop. The British keep invading war. Actually, notice that the British are actually in front of the US in granting Ukraine use of military forces against Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The Europeans are afraid of Russia, but they don't want to go really into war with it. So the Europeans are more or less on US side on this. Whether I mean by the Europeans, France and Germany fundamentally. Okay. So this has been grinding on towards a standstill and negotiation for the last year. What happened is Putin is saying, well, I want this out of my face now, because I have other more important business and I don't want to look like I'm spinning my wheels, because that does not project power, that projects weakness. And this is a known difference in tactics between Trump wing of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. The other guys are not very concerned about appearing to spin their wheels. Actually, they think that they can spin this by saying, see, we are not dominating everyone. We're not an imperial power. We're actually nice guys. We are consensual and we are collaborative. And that's why we're waiting for our partners to do stuff.
Yes, I think here everyone has their own goals and interests, but primarily the U.S. has already accomplished its goal by allowing the Europeans to also, or giving them space to also invade.
Well, actually, the Europeans have, in this war, find themselves in a tough spot.
Yes.
So, unlike the US, Russia is their neighbor. It's not disappearing. They have no interest in antagonizing Russia. So, beyond the strategic interest of, we don't want China to expand, they have no interest in antagonizing Russia. And actually, they are not as apprehensive about China as the US, because they are not the dominant imperial power. They are just part of the imperial structure. So you would see that they are not as forthcoming at confronting China as the US. But the issue is, you have the British trying to create trouble and to egg on the war, and you have Ukraine, which has to hit a wall and realize that it cannot get very far, and it has to accept this. What the US was going for the last year is grinding to ceasefire and peace negotiation through attrition, by the Ukrainians realizing the limits of their abilities. In the meantime, as long as Russia was not collapsing, they were fine with that. It's good that they want to contain Russia anyway, so it wasn't a bad thing. What we need to keep in mind is, to imperial powers, war is a good thing. Continuation of war is a good thing, not in the old foolish leftist spiel of, well, the industrial military complex is gaining money by selling weapons. This is very superficial, because the world is not just about weapons. The world is about phones and oil and food and grains, and the continuation of war between people other than you weaken all of them and make them need all of that from you.
Yes.
Even if you're not selling it, it makes you able to force the rules of how others can sell and buy these things that they are need for now. And because you are the organizing power of the colonial order, that is all to your advantage. So as long as the war is running within the acceptable limits to you, it's a good thing. Not because it's going to help the sales of your weapons only. This is a very reductive, superficial 1950s leftist spiel. It's a remnant of Soviet propaganda after World War II. So sometimes I find, even some Muslims repeating this very superficial, reductive picture, and that's wrong. It's more than that.
All right, Hassan, anything else?
No,
Can you
I
hear me?
think we're good for today.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you for that.